Hello everyone, welcome to and welcome back to my channel Book Time with Elvis with me, Mark, and also with Elvis there in the background. You can see him. It's a cold, dark, I want to say cold, dark winter's night, but it's only 4:30 in the afternoon, so, But there's loads of snow around, and definitely the winter season is in full drive. So it's been a while since I've made a video, probably over a week, I think. But I wanted to come back and make one, and I thought I would do a reading, actually. And I'm going to read from a collection. Well, it's not really a collection of stories, I suppose. It's one story, but it's split up into different parts. I won't read the whole thing in one go. I will put it out over a couple of episodes. And the book I've got is Alma Classics' wonderful edition, their beautiful design of After Supper Ghost Stories by Jerome K. Jerome. The original title is just called Told After Supper, and it's an 1891. Again, I use the word collection loosely. It's a collection in the sense that each person at the supper party gives a ghost story, so I suppose in that sense it is. And of course, ghost stories were a very big part of the Christmas tradition, through the Victorian era. And I'm not sure exactly when it dropped out of fashion and style, but and what Jerome K. Jerome does is he kind of parodies this in what I think is a very entertaining book, and it'd be well worth your time either to listen to this or read it on your own. It is, of course, free and available for download on Project Gutenberg, given the fact it is, well out of copyright by now. The name Jerome K. Jerome may, of course, be familiar to you. It'll certainly be familiar to people who watch this channel, as he was the author of Three Men in a Boat, which is, as everybody who watches this channel knows, my favorite work by any author, and probably my favorite book of all time. So let's crack on. Let's read it. Let's read at least the introductory part, and as I say, after that I will be back with the other parts if people so wish. So, introductory. It was Christmas Eve. I begin this way because it is the proper, orthodox, respectable way to begin, and I have been brought up in a proper, orthodox, respectable way, and taught to always do the proper, orthodox, respectable thing, and the habit clings to me. Of course, as a mere matter of information, it is quite unnecessary to mention the date at all. The experienced reader knows it was Christmas Eve without my telling him. It always is Christmas Eve in a ghost story. Christmas Eve is the ghosts' great gala night. On Christmas Eve, they hold their annual fete. On Christmas Eve, everybody in Ghostland who is anybody, or rather, speaking of ghosts, one should say, I suppose, every nobody who is any nobody comes out to show himself or herself, to see and to be seen, to promenade about and display their winding sheets and grave clothes to each other, to criticize one another's style and sneer at one another's complexion. Christmas Eve parade, as I expect they themselves term it, is a function, doubtless eagerly prepared for and looked forward to throughout Ghostland. Especially the swagger set, such as the murdered barons, the crime-stained countesses, and the earls who came over with the Conqueror and assassinated their relatives and died raving mad. Hollow moans and fiendish grins are, one may be sure, energetically practised up. Blood-curdling shrieks and marrow-freezing gestures are probably rehearsed for weeks beforehand. Rusty chains and gory daggers are overhauled and put into good working order, and sheets and shrouds laid carefully by from the previous year's show are taken down and shaken out and mended and aired. Oh, it is a stirring night in Ghostland, the night of December the 24th. Ghosts never come out on Christmas night itself. You may have noticed Christmas Eve, we suspect, has been too much for them. They are not used to excitement. For about a week after Christmas Eve, the gentleman ghosts no doubt feel as if they were all head and go about making solemn resolutions to themselves that they will stop in next Christmas Eve, while lady spectres are contradictory and snappish and liable to burst into tears and leave the room hurriedly on being spoken to, for no perceptible cause whatever. Ghosts with no position to maintain, mere middle-class ghosts, occasionally, I believe, do a little haunting on off nights, on All Hallows Eve and at Midsummer, and some will even run up for a mere local event to celebrate, for instance, the anniversary of the hanging of somebody's grandfather, or to prophesy a misfortune. He does love prophesying a misfortune, does the average British ghost. Send him out to prognosticate trouble to somebody, and he is happy. Let him force his way into a peaceful home and turn the whole house upside down by foretelling a funeral, or predicting a bankruptcy, or hinting at a coming disgrace, or some other terrible disaster, about which nobody in their senses would want to know sooner than they could possibly help, and the prior knowledge of which can serve no useful purpose whatsoever, and he feels that he is combining duty with pleasure. He would never forgive himself if anybody in his family had a trouble, and he had not been there for a couple of months beforehand, doing silly tricks on the lawn or balancing himself on somebody's bed rail. Then there are, besides, the very young or very conscientious ghosts with a lost will or an undiscovered number weighing heavy on their minds, who will haunt steadily all the year round, and also the fussy ghost who is indignant at having been buried in the dustbin or in the village pond, and who never gives the parish a single night's quiet until somebody has paid for a first-class funeral for him. But these are the exceptions. As I have said, the average orthodox ghost does his one turn a year on Christmas Eve and is satisfied. Why on Christmas Eve of all nights in the year, I never could myself understand. It is invariably one of the most dismal of nights to be out in. Cold, muddy and wet, and besides, at Christmas time everybody has quite enough to put up with in the way of a house full of living relations, without wanting the ghosts of any dead ones mooning about the place, I'm sure. There must be something ghostly in the air of Christmas, something about the close, muggy atmosphere that draws up the ghosts, like the dampness of the summer rains brings out the frogs and snails. And not only do the ghosts themselves always walk on Christmas Eve, but live people always sit and talk about them on Christmas Eve. Whenever 5 or 6 English-speaking people meet round a fire on Christmas Eve, they start telling each other ghost stories. Nothing satisfies us on Christmas Eve but to hear each other tell authentic anecdotes about spectres. It is a genial, festive season, and we love to muse upon graves and dead bodies and murders and blood. There is a good deal of similarity about our ghostly experiences, but this of course is not our fault, but the fault of ghosts, who never will try any new performances, but always will keep steadily to old safe business. The consequence is that when you have been at one Christmas Eve party and heard 6 people relate their adventures with spirits, you do not require to hear any more ghost stories. To listen to any further ghost stories after that would be like sitting out 2 farcical comedies or taking in 2 comic journals. The repetition would become wearisome. There is always the young man who was, one year, spending the Christmas at a country house, and on Christmas Eve they put him to sleep in the west wing. Then in the middle of the night the room door quietly opens, and somebody, generally a lady, in her nightdress, walks slowly in and comes and sits on the bed. The young man thinks it must be one of the visitors, or some relative of the family, though he does not remember having previously seen her, who, unable to go to sleep, and feeling lonesome all by herself, has come into his room for a chat. He has no idea it is a ghost. He is so unsuspicious. She does not speak, however, and when he looks again, she is gone. The young man relates the circumstance at the breakfast table next morning, and asks each of the ladies present if it were she who was his visitor, but they all assure him that it was not, and the host, who has grown deadly pale, begs him to say no more about the matter, which strikes the young man as a singularly strange request. After breakfast, the host takes the young man into a corner and explains to him that what he saw was the ghost of a lady who had been murdered in that very bed, or who had murdered somebody else there, It does not really matter which. You can be a ghost by murdering somebody else or by being murdered yourself, whichever you prefer. The murdered ghost is perhaps the more popular, but on the other hand, you can frighten people better if you are the murdered one, because then you can show your wounds and do groans. Then there is the skeptical guest. It is always the guest who gets let in for this sort of thing, by the by. A ghost never thinks much of his own family. It is the guest he likes to haunt who, after listening to the host's ghost story on Christmas Eve, laughs at it and says that he does not believe there are such things as ghosts at all, and that he will sleep in the haunted chamber that very night, if they will let him. Everybody urges him not to be reckless, but he persists in his foolhardiness and goes up to the yellow chamber, or whatever colour the haunted room may be, with a light heart and a candle, and wishes them all good night and shuts the door. Next morning he has got snow-white hair. He does not tell anybody what he has seen. It is too awful. There is also the plucky guest who sees a ghost and knows it is a ghost and watches it as it comes into the room and disappears through the wainscot. After which, as the ghost does not seem to be coming back, and there is nothing consequently to be gained by stopping awake, he goes to sleep. He does not mention having seen the ghost to anybody for fear of frightening them. Some people are so nervous about ghosts, but determines to wait for the next night and see if the apparition appears again. It does appear again, and this time he gets out of bed, dresses himself and does his hair and follows it, and then discovers a secret passage leading from the bedroom down to the beer cellar, a passage which, no doubt, was not unfrequently made use of in the bad old days of yore. After him comes the young man who woke up with a strange sensation in the middle of the night and found his rich bachelor uncle standing by his bedside. The rich uncle smiled, a weird sort of smile, and vanished. The young man immediately got up and looked at his watch. It had stopped at 4:30, he having forgot to wind it. He made inquiries the next day and found that, strangely enough, his rich uncle, whose only nephew he was, had married a widow with 11 children at exactly 11:45, only 2 days ago. The young man does not attempt to explain the circumstance. All he does is to vouch for the truth of his narrative. And to mention another case, there is the gentleman who is returning home late at night from a Freemasons' dinner, and who, noticing a light issuing from a ruined abbey, creeps up and looks through the keyhole. He sees the ghost of a grey sister kissing the ghost of a brown monk, and is so inexpressibly shocked and frightened that he faints on the spot, and is discovered there the next morning, lying in a heap against the door, still speechless, and with his faithful latchkey clasped tightly in his hand. All these things happen on Christmas Eve. They are all told of on Christmas Eve. For ghost stories to be told on any other evening than the evening of the 24th of December would be impossible in English society, as at present regulated. Therefore, in introducing the sad but authentic ghost stories that follow hereafter, I feel that it is unnecessary to inform the student of Anglo-Saxon literature that the date on which they were told and on which the incidents took place was Christmas Eve. Nevertheless, I do so. So there we go. That's the first part, the introductory part to Told After Supper, or After Supper Ghost Stories by Jerome K. Jerome. And I will be back with how the stories came to be told in another episode. I do hope you enjoyed it. I very much enjoy Jerome K. Jerome's writing. He's very funny, and I think he's still very funny even after all these years. And if you haven't read him, I urge you to. I don't think you'll be disappointed if you give him part of your time. And he's written a lot of short works as well. And as I say, everything he's written is for free on Project Gutenberg, so there's really no excuse. So there we go. Thank you very much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you all again very soon indeed. Do take care, everybody, and be careful out there. Bye-bye.